In August of 2020, what looked like an ordinary line of summer thunderstorms carved a 770-mile path across the American Midwest. It packed winds up to 140 miles per hour, equivalent to a high-end Category 4 hurricane making landfall. It flattened millions of acres of crops in a single afternoon, destroyed 4.4 million trees, and caused over $11 billion in damage, making it the costliest thunderstorm event in modern American history. But it wasn't a hurricane. It never formed over an ocean, and it didn't produce a single major tornado. It was classified, technically, as a line of severe thunderstorms, and when the morning began, the forecast called for a marginal chance of severe weather. The storm has a name that most Americans have never heard. It's called a derecho, and it may be the most destructive type of weather event that the general public has absolutely no mental model for. The word comes from Spanish, meaning straight or direct. It was coined in 1888 by a physicist named Gustavus Hinrichs, specifically to distinguish these massive straight-line windstorms from the rotational violence of tornadoes. And that distinction is the key to understanding why these storms kill people. Because the American public has been conditioned by decades of emergency sirens and disaster movies to fear exactly one geometry of wind, the kind that spins. When someone in the Midwest hears severe thunderstorm warning, they picture 15 minutes of heavy rain, some lightning, maybe a tree branch knocked into the yard. They've ridden out hundreds of these. It's atmospheric background noise, an excuse to stand on the porch with a coffee and watch the rain. That mental model is perfectly accurate almost every time. A derecho is the exception. To earn the classification, a storm must produce a continuous swath of wind damage stretching at least 240 miles, with multiple gusts exceeding 75 miles per hour, which happens to be the exact threshold where a tropical storm gets officially upgraded to a Category 1 hurricane. These systems can stretch hundreds of miles wide, cross multiple states in a single afternoon, and sustain winds matching an EF2 or EF3 tornado. Except the wind doesn't come from a narrow funnel touching down for 60 seconds. It blows in one direction, across everything in its path, for 45 minutes to an hour. And they are not freak events. The United States averages roughly 21 per year. They strike most often during the hottest months of summer. They show no preference for day or night. And they can organize so rapidly that forecasting models regularly fail to resolve the threat until the storm is already tearing through infrastructure. And because these storms nearly always form on the edge of stagnant summer heat domes, most people on the ground see nothing more than the leading edge of a heavy downpour about to break a heat wave. What they don't see is an inland hurricane advancing at highway speed. The straight-line winds are the defining feature, but they aren't the only threat a derecho carries. The extreme shear along the storm's leading edge can spin up tornadoes, dozens of them simultaneously. The 2020 Midwest derecho spawned 26 confirmed tornadoes across its damage path. And here's what makes them uniquely dangerous. They're effectively invisible, wrapped entirely in blinding, horizontally driven rain, and masked by the sheer scale of the surrounding wind field. These embedded tornadoes produce no visible funnel cloud. The survival instinct that tells you to scan the horizon for rotation is completely useless inside a derecho. The tornado is there, advancing at 50 to 60 miles per hour inside the broader storm, and you will never see it coming. And yet, the embedded tornadoes aren't what make derechos uniquely lethal over time. That distinction belongs to something that happens after the wind stops entirely, under a perfectly clear sky. On June 29, 2012, a progressive derecho swept from the Ohio Valley to the Atlantic coast, striking Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia with sustained hurricane-force winds. 13 people were killed directly, trees driven through roofs, structures collapsing onto occupants. But the storm's most devastating consequence had nothing to do with blunt force trauma. It had everything to do with what it did to the electrical grid. Over 5 million customers lost power simultaneously, an outage affecting a population larger than the entire state of Oregon. And the storm had formed, as derechos frequently do, on the periphery of a massive atmospheric heat dome. Once the wind stopped and the clouds cleared, the heat settled back over the region, pushing temperatures well past 100 degrees. 5 million people, no air conditioning, in the cities for days, in rural West Virginia for weeks. Nearly 40% of all heat-related deaths in the United States occur inside a permanent home. After the 2012 derecho, at least 20 people, and likely closer to 34, died not from the wind, but from the crushing indoor temperatures that followed. Their homes, stripped of power, had gone from shelters to thermal traps in a matter of hours. The derecho didn't kill them directly. It stripped away the one piece of infrastructure keeping them alive in a hostile climate, and then the climate did the rest. 13 people died in the wind. The heat that followed killed more. When a derecho approaches, the first thing you notice is the sky. The entire horizon darkens, not gradually, not in the slow buildup of a typical afternoon storm, but all at once. A massive shelf cloud stretches as far as you can see in both directions, low and turbulent, its underside glowing an unnatural bruised green. Because these storms nearly always form on the edge of stagnant summer heat domes, the air ahead of them is hot, heavy, and motionless. When the front arrives, the temperature can plunge 15 to 20 degrees in a matter of seconds. That sudden coolness feels like relief. It is not. It's the leading edge of the kill mechanism reaching the surface. It starts inside the storm. As rain falls from the upper reaches of the thunderstorm complex into drier air below, it evaporates. Evaporation cools the surrounding air, and cooler air is denser air, heavier. This dense mass plummets toward the ground, and when it hits the surface, it has nowhere to go but sideways. It fans out horizontally in every direction, hugging the terrain, creating what meteorologists call the cold pool, a fast-moving wedge of heavy, rain-cooled air that races ahead of the storm. And this is where the engine locks in. As the cold pool surges forward, it scoops up the hot, humid, highly unstable air sitting ahead of the storm and forces it violently upward. That forced lifting triggers new thunderstorm cells along the leading edge. Those new cells produce more rain, which falls through more dry air, which creates more evaporative cooling, which feeds the cold pool further. The system is building itself as it moves, consuming the atmosphere ahead of it and converting it into forward momentum and kinetic energy, mile after mile. But the critical event happens behind the leading edge. As the storm matures and its cloud canopy expands backward, a massive pressure gradient develops at the rear of the system. This gradient pulls mid-level air, from 10,000 to 15,000 feet above the ground, into the back of the storm at tremendous speed, then channels it directly downward to the surface. Meteorologists call this the rear inflow jet. When it descends and strikes the ground, it delivers a staggering amount of kinetic energy directly to everything below. The rear inflow jet pushes the center of the storm's leading edge forward faster than the sides, which is why, on radar, the whole structure takes on a distinct bowed shape, arching outward like a drawn bow. At the apex of that bow is where the jet is delivering maximum force. It spawns downbursts, columns of dense air that slam into the ground and fan outward across areas 4 to 6 miles wide. Nested inside those downbursts are even smaller, hyper-concentrated corridors of peak wind called burst swaths, each one roughly the length of a football field, each capable of delivering forces equivalent to an EF3 tornado. Because they're scattered randomly across the broader wind field, the destruction they leave behind looks chaotic. One house leveled, the one next door largely intact. Post-storm survey teams frequently misidentify the damage as tornadic. A typical severe thunderstorm subjects a given location to strong winds for 3 to 5 minutes, then passes. A mature derecho, driven by a fully established rear inflow jet, sustains hurricane-force winds over a single point for 45 to 60 minutes. That's not a gust. It's the difference between a punch and a sustained crush, close to an hour of continuous, unrelenting pressure on every tree, every roof, and every utility pole in its path. Straight-line thunderstorm winds kill an average of 84 Americans per year, a number roughly comparable to the annual death toll from tornadoes. And yet, for decades, the system responsible for alerting the public treated them as routine. The reason is structural. Prior to 2021, the National Weather Service used the same standard severe thunderstorm warning for any storm-producing winds above 58 miles per hour. A garden-variety squall that toppled a few garbage cans triggered the exact same digital alert on your phone as a 770-mile-wide atmospheric engine packing 140-mile-per-hour winds. Identical tone, identical format. Making it worse, municipal tornado sirens have traditionally been reserved exclusively for rotating winds. A derecho capable of flattening an entire city block could sweep through a metro area without triggering a single siren. The wind wasn't spinning, so the sirens stayed silent. It took the 2020 catastrophe, $11 billion in damage, and a wholesale failure of public sheltering to force a systemic change. In August of 2021, the NWS introduced damage threat categories for severe thunderstorm warnings. Storms producing or expected to produce winds over 80 miles per hour now trigger a wireless emergency alert tagged destructive. the same jarring phone alarm previously reserved for tornado warnings and amber alerts. Whether that fix arrived in time is a separate question. The physical targets for these storms keep getting larger. Atmospheric scientist Walker Ashley has documented what he calls the expanding bullseye effect. The observation that even if extreme storms aren't intensifying, the damage they inflict is mathematically guaranteed to increase because the targets keep getting bigger. As Midwestern cities sprawl outward, converting open farmland into subdivisions and strip malls and mobile home communities, they present a wider, more fragile target for a storm system that was already 400 miles across. A derecho crossing central Iowa in 1960 primarily hit crops. The exact same atmospheric engine crossing the same ground today hits 1 million people and $13 billion of built environment. And the storms themselves are carrying more energy. Recent analysis shows thunderstorm straight-line wind speeds in the central United States have intensified by roughly 7% for every degree of warming observed since 1980. 7% sounds modest until you consider what it means at the margins. The difference between a gust that strips shingles and one that peels off an entire roof section, between a storm that knocks down branches and one that snaps century-old hardwoods at the trunk. Bigger targets, stronger storms, and most people still don't know the word for what's coming. So if your phone triggers a severe thunderstorm warning with the word destructive attached to it, treat it exactly the way you would a tornado warning. Get to the lowest floor of a sturdy building, move to an interior room, and stay away from windows. Under extreme wind loading, residential windows don't crack. They shatter inward. If you're in a mobile home, leave before the gust front arrives. A manufactured home provides virtually no structural protection against sustained 100-mile-per-hour straight-line winds. If you're driving and a massive shelf cloud appears on the horizon, get off the highway and find a sturdy commercial building. These systems maintain forward speeds exceeding 60 miles per hour, and the crosswinds alone can push a loaded semi-truck off the road. And if you lose power during a summer derecho, the danger hasn't ended, it's shifted. Grid restoration after one of these events takes days to weeks, not hours. If extreme heat follows, know where your nearest generator-backed cooling center is. Don't assume your house will stay survivable without mechanical cooling, because the storm that just passed was built on the edge of a heat dome, and that dome is still sitting there.